Jenna Clark sat in her boss Mark Wells's sleek corner office, holding Avery Reed's certificate of completion, the warmth of the paper a tangible reminder of her efforts. She had spent the past few months meticulously training Avery, a bright intern eager to learn the ins and outs of the company's regulatory processes. Jenna felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing that Avery was now ready to take on responsibilities she had once carried. It was supposed to be a moment of pride, but the calmness was shattered as Mark's phone rang. "Jenna," Mark began, his voice cool and dismissive, "we're eliminating your position. Budget cuts. Your last day is today." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Jenna froze, struggling to process what had just been said. Her 25 years of hard work, dedication, and expertise gone in an instant. She had played a key role in building this company from a small startup into a prominent firm. Her knowledge of navigating the complexities of regulatory systems had been the backbone of their success. Without her, many of their projects would have stalled, and yet, here she was, being dismissed without a second thought. Mark, indifferent to the weight of the moment, added with a casual tone, "Avery will take over your responsibilities. She'll do just fine. Thanks for everything, Granny." Granny. The insult stung more than the firing itself. With that single word, Mark reduced her years of expertise to nothing. She was being discarded as if she had no value left to offer, like an outdated piece of office equipment. Jenna gathered herself, a quiet storm building inside her. She wasn't going to let this slide. They hadn't seen the last of her. Jenna's mind raced as she sat in Mark Wells's sleek corner office, her fingers gripping Avery Reed's certificate of completion. The glossy paper, once a symbol of pride, now felt like a weight in her hand. She had poured months of effort into Avery's training, sharing everything she knew about the intricate maze of regulatory compliance. This was supposed to be a moment of fulfillment, a moment where she could see the future of the company in the hands of a capable intern. But as Jenna sat across from Mark, the cold, sterile office, glass walls, chrome accents, minimalistic furniture, seemed to mock her. It was a far cry from the humble beginnings she had helped build. Mark's eyes remained focused on his phone, tapping away at something more important than her. Budget cuts. Her heart sank. She couldn't process it. "Jenna," Mark said, finally looking up from his phone with a detached expression, "we're eliminating your position. Budget cuts. Your last day is today." Jenna blinked, her body frozen in disbelief. She couldn't breathe. Eliminating your position? Her mind circled the words like they didn't belong to the same world she had worked so hard to build. The years of late nights, the meetings, the permits, the relationships, all of it reduced to a brief sentence. Her throat felt tight as she slowly looked down at Avery's certificate. Mark's tone was casual, almost rehearsed. "Avery will take over your responsibilities from here on out," he continued, his words dismissing everything Jenna had spent her career cultivating. "She'll do just fine," he added with a shrug, as if he were discussing a routine project. Avery, the intern, the one who had spent 4 months learning the basics, trying her best to catch up. Avery, who had no experience in navigating complex city regulations, whose idea of business networking was a selfie with a city planner. The thought of her, an intern with little to no understanding of the gravity of the projects they handled, now stepping into her shoes felt like a slap to Jenna's face. In the silence that followed, Jenna felt the weight of her experience, her worth, crushing her. Did Mark even see it? Did he care? A flood of memories rushed through Jenna's mind when she had first joined the company, when they were struggling, barely able to secure a project. She had been the one to push through permits, to smooth over issues with city officials, to use every ounce of knowledge she had built over decades to make things happen. Her years of work had helped shape this company, yet here she was discarded like an outdated office machine. Avery would now be handed the reins, all of Jenna's hard work reduced to an afterthought. Her hands shook as she held the certificate, still not quite believing the absurdity of it. Was she really being replaced by someone with no experience at all? Mark's casual demeanor only deepened the insult. Jenna's mind was a blur of confusion and hurt, but she managed to steady herself long enough to speak. "Will there be a transition period?" Her voice was calm, but her insides churned. She couldn't just leave without making sure Avery had at least a little more guidance. After all, this was the project that had defined the company's future. Mark didn't even hesitate. No, it won't be necessary. Avery's up to speed. You've done a thorough job training her, he said, the words falling from his lips without a second thought, as if her expertise didn't matter at all. It felt like a punch to the gut. Then came the final blow. I've arranged for security to help you pack up, Mark continued, his eyes already back on his phone. They'll escort you out by noon. Escort? She couldn't believe it. Escort? After everything she had given to this company, this was how it ended? Jenna felt a cold rush of humiliation. She wasn't just being let go, she was being treated like a criminal, like someone who couldn't be trusted to leave on her own. Mark never looked up as she stood, still clutching Avery's certificate in one hand, her other hand shaking as she gathered her things. She moved slowly, mechanically, like she was in some sort of dream. The small box of her personal belongings felt heavier with each step. She passed by the reception desk, where Avery sat waiting, trying to appear concerned, but Jenna could see the faint excitement in her eyes. She knew this was coming. And as Jenna was escorted out of the building, walking through the sterile halls that once felt like home, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the worst betrayal of all. It wasn't just the firing, it was the total lack of respect for her, for what she had built, for the years of sweat and sacrifice. They hadn't seen the last of her. Jenna wasn't going to walk away quietly. Not now, not after all this. Not after they so casually tossed her aside. Jenna's hands gripped the steering wheel as she drove through the familiar streets, the hum of the engine the only sound in the car. She wasn't sure how long she had been driving. Time seemed to stretch and compress in odd ways since she walked out of the office. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, the shock of what had just happened still settling in. She kept replaying Mark's words in her mind, budget cuts, last day today, as if they were some cruel joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was real. She had just been dismissed after 25 years of dedication to this company, 25 years of hard work, of navigating the kind of complex legal and regulatory hurdles that most people couldn't even comprehend. And now it is all gone. Just like that. The streets passed by in a blur as Jenna's mind wandered back to the early days, when the company was just a handful of employees struggling to stay afloat. She had been there from the beginning, when they were barely making a name for themselves in the urban development industry. She remembered the sleepless nights she spent fighting for permits, calling in favors from city officials, and meticulously managing projects. Her experience had been the foundation on which this company was built. Without her, there was no way they could have secured the high-profile projects they had. She had helped shape the firm into what it was today, but now, she was nothing more than an afterthought. A sharp breath escaped her lips as she parked her car in the driveway. The weight of the world seemed to press down on her, and for a moment, she just sat there, staring at the steering wheel. Was this how it was all supposed to end? She couldn't believe it. But then, her phone buzzed in her purse, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Megan. Mom? What's going on? You're supposed to be at work. Her daughter's voice came through the phone, filled with confusion and concern. Jenna's heart sank, knowing her daughter was already worried. She hadn't told her about the firing yet. I'm not at work, Meg, Jenna replied, her voice cracking slightly despite her best effort to sound calm. I've been fired. There was a long silence on the other end, followed by Megan's sharp intake of breath. What? Fired? No way. Mom, that's ridiculous. What happened? Jenna let out a slow exhale, her fingers tapping nervously against the wheel. Mark, he said it was budget cuts. He told me I'm being replaced by Avery. The words came out like acid in her mouth. Replaced. By someone who hadn't even been in the company long enough to know how to submit a permit application correctly. Megan's anger was immediate, her voice rising. That's age discrimination, Mum. You can sue them. You've got a case. Jenna closed her eyes for a moment, trying to collect herself. Maybe, but I don't know if I want to go down that road, she said, her voice quieter now. I don't want to get into a nasty legal battle with them. I want to take control of this in a way that feels right. Not like I'm just fighting for some kind of revenge. Megan's frustration, was palpable. "Mom, this isn't fair. You've worked there for over 2 decades. You've done more for that company than anyone. And they just throw you out like this? They don't deserve you." Jenna smiled softly, though there was sadness in it. "I know, honey. I know. But I can't just let it go." She paused, the quiet hum of the car settling around her. She stared at the street, her mind clicking into place. Wait. It was like a light bulb went off in her mind. Clark Regulatory Solutions. She had started the consulting company years ago, long before things had gotten complicated with the firm. It had been a small side business, something to give her a little extra financial security and to maintain a degree of independence. But now, with the company's current turmoil, it was the key. Without her signature, all of the important permits for their ongoing projects, big projects, the kind that could make or break the company's future, would be stuck in limbo. She was the only one who could push those permits through. Jenna leaned back in her seat, a slow, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She realized something important at that moment. She wasn't powerless. Not anymore. She had been dismissed, sure. But she still had Clark Regulatory Solutions, and that meant she had control over the permits, over their future. She wasn't going to let Mark and the company get away with this. She was going to use her business to remind them of what they had lost. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about proving that experience mattered, that no one could replace decades of hard-earned expertise with a social media following. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. "No, Megan. I'm not suing them, but I'm going to show them exactly what they threw away. I'll make them regret this." Megan's voice softened. "I know you will, Mum. You always do." Jenna sat there for a moment, letting the weight of the realization sink in. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Jenna sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling beside her as she typed the first few lines of the letter. Her mind raced with possibilities, each keystroke adding a sense of control she hadn't felt since the moment Mark had fired her. Clark Regulatory Solutions had always been her safety net, but now it was her weapon. She had a legal right to withhold her signature on the critical permits that stood between the company and its future. Without her, their $50 million projects would come to a halt. The thought of Mark, pacing in his sleek office, realizing just how badly he had miscalculated gave her a rush of satisfaction. But before she could finish, her phone buzzed with an incoming text message from Mark. "Jenna, we need to talk. I don't understand why you're not responding. This is urgent." She ignored it, pressing forward with her letter, each sentence more assertive than the last. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Mark, his frustration clear in the hurried, terse language. "Please call me immediately. This has gone too far. We can work something out." Jenna set her phone face down, allowing herself a small smile. This was exactly what she had hoped for, his panic, his sense of urgency. He hadn't realized how deeply she had embedded herself into the very fabric of their business. She could almost see his face, how the calm, confident mask was slipping as he tried to figure out how to undo what he had done. But Jenna wasn't interested in negotiating. Not yet. She typed furiously, the letter taking shape under her fingers. She was going to play this the right way. No more being the quiet worker bee in the background. She had earned her place, and it was time to remind everyone of her value. "Dear Mark Wells and the Everline Board of Directors," she typed, her fingers moving swiftly. "I, Jenna Clark, founder and principal of Clark Regulatory Solutions, is the sole party responsible for securing critical regulatory approvals for the Riverside development, as well as other ongoing projects under Everline's management. As of today, I am no longer employed by your company, and any further work required on these projects must be carried out through my consulting firm. I will not authorize any permits unless formal arrangements are made." Her hand trembled slightly as she continued, but she pressed on. "For completion of the permit process for the Riverside project, I am offering my services for a consulting fee of $80,000, which represents approximately what I would have earned in salary over the next several months, plus formal credit as the regulatory compliance expert on all project documentation. This will ensure all required permits are processed efficiently and without delay. Failure to come to terms with this agreement will result in a standstill on all related projects." She reread the letter carefully, checking for any potential gaps. This was it, the moment she took control. No more chasing approval. She wasn't begging for her job back. She was demanding fair compensation for the work she had already done. The projects were stuck without her, and she wasn't about to give up that leverage. She attached her signature to the letter and hit send. The letter, now on its way to Mark, was like a breath of fresh air to Jenna. For the first time since her firing, she felt the weight lifting off her shoulders. She had made the move. Now it was up to him to figure out how to fix it. Minutes passed, and her phone buzzed again. This time it was another email from Mark. His tone was more frantic than before. "Jenna, please don't do this. Let's talk. You can't just walk away from everything we've built. You're making a huge mistake." Jenna read it and felt a wave of calm wash over her. She could feel his desperation, his realization that things weren't going to go back to the way they were. He needed her. She had built this empire, and now he was going to pay the price for underestimating her. She stared at the email for a moment before typing a brief response. "I'm afraid this is not a mistake, Mark." No more words needed. She hit send and placed her phone face down, pushing it aside. Her next step was clear. She was going to watch as the pieces fell into place. The next few days were going to be interesting. She had no intention of just fading away into the background like she had for so many years. It was time for Jenna Clark to rise, on her own terms. Minutes later, Jenna checked her phone again. Another message from Mark. "You don't know what you're doing. This could ruin everything." She paused, letting that sink in. Yes, it could ruin everything for him. The thought made her smile. It was only a matter of time before he realized just how much he needed her. Jenna's phone buzzed again, breaking the silence in her kitchen. This time, the name on the screen made her pause. Elliot Grant. Her heart skipped a beat. Elliot was the principal investor behind the Riverstone complex, the $50 million mixed-use development that had been central to Everline's success. It was a project she had been deeply involved in for over a year, navigating the regulatory hurdles that had made it possible. Without her expertise, the entire project was stalled, stuck in the bureaucracy of city permits that only she had the power to push through. Jenna took a deep breath before answering. "Elliot," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Jenna, thank God I reached you." Elliot's voice came through, laced with urgency. "We've hit a snag with the permits for Riverstone. Mark's team assured me everything was moving along, but it's clear that there's been a breakdown since your departure. We can't move forward without your signature on the approvals. I need to meet with you today if possible." Jenna's thoughts raced, but she knew what needed to be done. This was the moment. She couldn't allow herself to be stuck in the past, fighting over what was rightfully hers. She needed to control the narrative, and Elliot was a perfect place to start. "I'm available," she replied. "Let's meet." Within the hour, Jenna was sitting across from Elliot in his sleek downtown office, the windows offering a clear view of the city. The space was polished, reflecting the professionalism of the man who had invested millions into the Riverstone project. As they exchanged pleasantries, Jenna felt the familiar rush of confidence she had once felt in Everline's boardrooms. But today, she wasn't there as an employee. She was there as an expert, a consultant who knew her worth. Elliot wasted no time getting to the point. "I'm sure you're aware of the mess we're in," he said, leaning forward, his brow furrowed. "The city can't proceed with the project until we get your sign-off on the permits. And Mark is telling me it's out of his hands now that you've left. But that's simply not true, is it?" Jenna kept her expression calm, her eyes steady on him. "No, Elliot, it's not true. I've been the one managing the regulatory side of this project, not Mark, not anyone else. And while the company has been involved in some of the preliminary work, it's my business, Clark Regulatory Solutions, that has overseen all the critical approvals. I am the only one who can move this forward." She handed him a file full of documents, emails, permits, applications, and meeting notes that traced the entire approval process, all signed under her consulting company's name. Each piece of evidence laid out how her absence had left the project in limbo, how Mark's dismissal of her had created a situation where the project couldn't move forward without her. Elliot scanned the documents, his face unreadable. Jenna could sense his surprise. He had been used to dealing with younger consultants, the ones who quickly folded under pressure, eager to please their clients. But here was Jenna, experienced, calm, and methodical, presenting him with irrefutable evidence of her importance. He looked up at her, admiration in his eyes. "I see. You've been the backbone of this project, haven't you?" Mark's team clearly underestimated the situation. Jenna nodded, the faintest hint of a smile curling her lips. "That's putting it lightly." There was a moment of silence as Elliot processed the situation. Then, he leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Jenna, I have an offer for you. I'm not interested in dealing with Everline anymore. I can see now that the company's handling of this project was sloppy at best. What I want is for you to work directly with me and my team at Grant and Partners for the duration of Riverstone. And, if it goes well, we'll extend our relationship to all of our projects in the city moving forward." Jenna's heart quickened, but she didn't let it show. This was exactly what she had been hoping for. She had leveraged her expertise, and now it was paying off. But she needed more. "I appreciate the offer, Elliot, but I'm not interested in working through anyone else's framework. I'll continue to run Clark Regulatory Solutions as an independent consultant, handling the projects on my own terms." Elliot didn't flinch. "Of course. I expected nothing less. I'm offering you a six-figure contract for your services, with performance bonuses tied to key milestones and regulatory successes. We want you to have the freedom to work independently while still benefiting from the scale of our project. I'll personally ensure that your expertise is recognized across every level of the development process." Jenna considered the offer for a moment, her mind calculating. This was a golden opportunity, one that aligned perfectly with her vision for the future. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady, her resolve firm. "Good," Elliot said with a smile. "We'll get the paperwork sorted. You'll be receiving the formal contract from our legal team by the end of the day. But Jenna, one more thing, thank you for saving Riverstone." Jenna stood, extending her hand across the table. "Thank you, Elliot. I'm looking forward to getting this project back on track." As they shook hands, Jenna's mind raced with possibilities. This was the start of something bigger. The sense of control she had been searching for was finally within her grasp. It wasn't about revenge. It was about building something stronger, something that respected her experience, her worth. Mark had underestimated her, but Jenna Clark was about to prove just how wrong he was. Jenna sat at her desk, her eyes scanning through the incoming emails from Mark, each one more frantic than the last. The first had come within hours of their meeting, an urgent plea for her to call him back. But when she didn't respond, the tone shifted. The next message was a little more desperate, offering her a raise, more responsibilities, and the promise of a more prominent role in the company if she would just reconsider. The words, "We need you," were highlighted in bold. By the third email, Mark was practically begging, "Jenna, you can't just walk away from this. I made a huge mistake. Come back, please." But Jenna wasn't interested. The sense of control she felt after making the decision to leave had only grown stronger. She knew her worth now, and she wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Mark, believe they could push her aside and then snap their fingers to bring her back. She had made her choice, and it was a choice to take control of her career, not to be some afterthought in a company that had discarded her like an old receipt. Ignoring his increasingly desperate messages, Jenna turned her attention to the more important matters at hand. The phone calls and texts from colleagues, former clients, and even industry journalists were constant. Word had spread quickly about her deal with Elliot Grant, and people were eager to hear the story. Journalists reached out for interviews, asking how she had pulled off what seemed like a major coup, becoming the key player in saving the Riverstone complex after being unceremoniously fired. Jenna's reputation skyrocketed almost overnight. She had been the quiet backbone of the firm for so long, but now she was the woman who had turned a multi-million-dollar project around with nothing but her knowledge and expertise. Developers from across the city started to take note, and soon she was receiving offers from various firms wanting to retain her services. Jenna had become a name to reckon with in the world of urban development, a consultant whose influence was now undeniable. But what truly brought a smile to her face was the fallout at Everline. The Riverstone complex, once stalled in its tracks, was back on schedule, thanks to Jenna's involvement. The permits had been processed under her consulting company's supervision, and everything was moving forward as planned. Meanwhile, Mark's firm, now struggling to keep up with the demands of the project, was beginning to unravel. They were hemorrhaging clients, unable to move forward without the regulatory approvals Jenna had so carefully built and maintained. No one wanted to work with a firm that didn't have the right expertise to navigate the complex regulatory landscape. The more Jenna heard about Mark's firm faltering, the more justified she felt in her decision. It wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring that her experience, her skills, and her hard work were respected. Mark had taken her for granted, and now he was paying the price. His desperation was almost palpable. Jenna wasn't sure if he truly understood what he had lost or if he was simply too prideful to admit his mistake. Jenna's success had come not just from the deal she brokered, but from her deep, irreplaceable knowledge of city planning and regulatory requirements. Mark's youthful focus on flashy, quick results had blinded him to the value of experience. Now, as the project stalled and clients pulled away, Jenna could see the reality of how much they had needed her. The calls continued, but now they were mostly from companies seeking her expertise, real projects, real opportunities. Jenna had turned the tables. She wasn't the forgotten woman in the back office anymore. She was the woman who had saved a project worth millions, and she was doing it all on her terms. As she sat back in her chair, smiling at the steady stream of new opportunities rolling in, Jenna knew one thing for sure: Everline would never forget what they lost. At 60 years old, Jenna had never felt more alive in her career. After months of navigating the rocky transition, she was now fully settled into her new role with Grant and Partners. The company, which had initially come to her in need of help, was now flourishing under her expertise. Jenna had full control over all regulatory compliance, and the projects were running smoothly, something they hadn't been able to say in months. Every aspect of city planning and permitting was efficiently handled, and Jenna's consulting business, Clark Regulatory Solutions, was booming. She was bringing in new clients faster than she could manage, all of whom wanted her unique expertise to navigate the complex regulatory landscape that had tripped up so many others. Jenna wasn't just a part of the project anymore. She was the driving force behind its success. Every critical decision, every crucial approval, came through her. Mark had tried to replace her with someone younger, but Jenna had proven that experience couldn't be replicated. It was her years of hard work, her deep relationships with city officials, and her unmatchable knowledge of the regulatory processes that kept everything running smoothly. Meanwhile, Mark's firm was sinking. The clients who had once trusted him, impressed by his flashy pitches and youthful energy, were now jumping ship to work with Jenna directly or with Grant and Partners. Elliot's team, which had steadily risen with Jenna's help, was taking on the lion's share of the work, leaving Everline scrambling to keep their footing. Jenna had even heard that Avery Reed, the young intern Mark had put in charge of her former responsibilities, was struggling to manage the projects that Jenna had carefully built. The reports she heard were filled with mistakes, missed deadlines, neglected details, things Jenna had always been there to smooth over. Avery wasn't ready for the responsibility, and it was starting to show. Jenna couldn't help but feel a sense of detached satisfaction as she heard about Mark's downfall. The company that had treated her so callously was now paying the price for its short-sightedness. Jenna had seen the warning signs when she was there, but it had taken her leaving for Mark and the firm to finally realize what they had lost. Their loss was her gain, and it was becoming more apparent every day. Her success didn't go unnoticed. The local news, always looking for stories of perseverance and triumph, picked up on Jenna's rise and featured her in a headline-making article, How Jenna Clark Turned a Firing into a Multi-million-dollar Opportunity. The article went into detail about how Jenna had not only survived her firing but had built a thriving business, proving to the world that age was not a barrier to success. Jenna's story was inspiring. It became a symbol of defiance against ageism in a world that often pushed aside its older, wiser workers in favor of younger, less experienced faces. As Jenna read the article, she leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about the journey, the surprise firing, the initial sense of loss, the sting of being underestimated. But it was those very challenges that had shaped her into the businesswoman she had become today. She wasn't just a granny anymore. She was an entrepreneur who had taken control of her future and built something meaningful. She had proved that experience and wisdom couldn't be dismissed, no matter how much younger. Louder voices tried to drown them out. Jenna smiled to herself, knowing that this was only the beginning. She was building a legacy that would last long after those who had tried to discard her had been forgotten. Age was just a number, and Jenna was living proof that it was never too late to take charge and make your mark. As Jenna walked through the final phases of the Riverstone complex, overseeing every last detail of the regulatory tasks, she couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet triumph. The project was nearing completion, and it was shaping up to be one of the most successful developments in the region. Jenna had transformed a stalled, struggling venture into a model of efficiency, proving once again that experience and expertise were the true foundations of success. At an industry event a few weeks later, Jenna walked through the crowd, her presence commanding attention. She was a woman who had built something real, something enduring. She wasn't the quiet, behind-the-scenes worker anymore. She was the one in charge, and everyone knew it. As she made her way across the room, she saw Mark standing near a group of colleagues. Their eyes met for just a moment. His, a mix of discomfort and recognition. Hers, calm and unwavering. There was no need for words. Jenna had already won. She had proven everything she needed to, not with harsh words or vindictive action, but through her hard work, her knowledge, and the undeniable success of her projects. Mark's firm, once the shining star, was now fading into the background, while Jenna stood at the forefront of an industry that had overlooked her for far too long. She smiled to herself and turned away.
She didn't need to say anything.
Her success spoke for itself.